Chapter 8. On June 18, 5 hours after he had talked to his cousin Bill Hapscomb, Joe Bob Brentwood pulled down a speeder on Texas Highway 40 about 25 miles east of Arnett. The speeder was Harry Trent of Braintree, an insurance man. He had been doing 65 miles per in a 50-mile-an-hour zone. Joe Bob gave him a speeding ticket. Trent accepted it humbly and then amused Joe Bob by trying to sell him insurance on his house and his life. Joe Bob felt fine, dying was the last thing on his mind. Nevertheless, he was already a sick man. He had gotten more than gas at Bill Hapscomb's Texaco. And he gave Harry Trent more than a speeding summons. Harry, a gregarious man who liked his job, passed the sickness to more than 40 people during that day and the next. How many those 40 passed it to is impossible to say. You might as well ask how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. If you were to make a conservative estimate of 5 apiece, you'd have 200. Using the same conservative formula, one could say those 200 went on to infect 1,000, the 1,000 5,000, the 5,000 25,000. Under the California desert and subsidized by the taxpayers' money, someone had finally invented a chain letter that really worked. A very lethal chain letter. On June 19, the day Larry Underwood came home to New York and the day that Franny Goldsmith told her father about her impending little stranger, Harry Trent stopped at an East Texas cafe called Babe's Quick Eat for lunch. He had the cheeseburger platter and a piece of Babe's delicious strawberry pie for dessert. He had a slight cold, an allergy cold, maybe, and he kept sneezing and having to spit. In the course of the meal he infected Babe, the dishwasher, 2 truckers in a corner booth, the man who came in to deliver bread, and the man who came in to change the records on the juke. He left the sweet tang that waited his table a $1 tip that was crawling with death. On his way out, a station wagon pulled in. There was a roof rack on top, and the wagon was piled high with kids and luggage. The wagon had New York plates and the driver, who rolled down his window to ask Harry how to get to US 21 going north, had a New York accent. Harry gave the New York fellow very clear directions on how to get to Highway 21. He also served him and his entire family their death warrants without even knowing it. The New Yorker was Edward M. Norris, Lieutenant of Police, Detective Squad, in the Big Apple's 87th Precinct. This was his first real vacation in 5 years. He and his family had had a fine time. The kids had been in 7th heaven at Disney World in Orlando. And not knowing the whole family would be dead by the 2nd of July, Norris planned to tell that sour son of a bitch Steve Carella that it was possible to take your wife and kids someplace by car and have a good time. Steve, he would say, you may be a fine detective, but a man who can't police his own family ain't worth a pisshole drilled in a snowbank. The Norris family had a quick eat at Babe's, then followed Harry Trent's admirable directions to Highway 21. Ed and his wife Trish marveled over Southern hospitality while the 3 kids colored in the back seat. Christ only knew, Ed thought, what Carella's pair of monsters would have been up to. That night they stayed in a Eustis, Oklahoma, travel court. Ed and Trish infected the clerk. The kids, Marcia, Stanley, and Hector, infected the kids they played with on the tourist court's playground, kids bound for West Texas, Alabama, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Trish infected the 2 women who were washing clothes at the laundromat 2 blocks away. Ed, on his way down the motel corridor to get some ice, infected a fellow he passed in the hallway. Everybody got into the act. Trish woke Ed up in the early morning hours to tell him that Heck, the baby, was sick. He had an ugly, rasping cough and was running a fever. It sounded to her like the croup. Ed Norris groaned and told her to give the kid some aspirin. If the kid's goddamn croup could only have held off another 4 or 5 days, he could have had it in his very own house and Ed would have been left with the memory of a perfect vacation, not to mention the anticipation of all that gloating he planned to do. He could hear the poor kid through the connecting door, hacking away like a hound dog. Trish expected that Hector's symptoms would abate in the morning. Croup was a lying down sickness, but by noon of the 20th, She admitted to herself that it wasn't happening. The aspirin wasn't controlling the fever, poor Heck was just glass-eyed with it. His cough had taken on a booming note she didn't like, and his respiration sounded labored and phlegmy. Whatever it was, Marcia seemed to be coming down with it, too, and Trish had a nasty little tickle in the back of her own throat that was making her cough, although so far it was only a light cough she could smother in a small hanky. "We've got to get Heck to a doctor," she said finally. Ed pulled into a service station and checked the map paperclip to the station wagon sunvisor. They were in Hammer Crossing, Kansas. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe we can at least find a doctor who'll give us a referral." He sighed and ran an aggravated hand through his hair. Hammer Crossing, Kansas. Jesus. Why'd he have to get sick enough to need a doctor at some goddamn nothing place like this? Marcia, who was looking at the map over her father's shoulder, said, "It says Jesse James robbed the bank here, Daddy." "Twice." "Fuck Jesse James," Ed grumped. "Ed." Trish cried. "Sorry," he said, not feeling sorry in the least. He drove on. After 6 calls, during each of which Ed Norris carefully held his temper with both hands, he finally found a doctor in Poliston who would look at Hector if they could get him there by 3. Poliston was off their route, 20 miles west of Hammer Crossing, but now the important thing was Hector. Ed was getting very worried about him. He'd never seen the kid with so little oomph in him. They were waiting in the outer office of Dr. Brendan Sweeney by 2 in the afternoon. By then Ed was sneezing, too. Sweeney's waiting room was full. They didn't get in to see the doctor until nearly 4 o'clock. Trish couldn't rouse Heck to more than a sludgy semi-consciousness, and she felt feverish herself. Only Stan Norris, age 9, still felt good enough to fidget. During their wait in Sweeney's office they communicated the sickness which would soon be known across the disintegrating country as Captain Trips to more than 25 people, including a matronly woman who just came in to pay her bill before going on to pass the disease to her entire bridge club. This matronly woman was Mrs. Robert Bradford, Sarah Bradford to the bridge club, Cookie to her husband and close friends. Sarah played well that night, possibly because her partner was Angela Dupre, her best friend. They seemed to enjoy a happy kind of telepathy. They won all 3 rubbers resoundingly, making a grand slam during the last. For Sarah, the only fly in the ointment was that she seemed to be coming down with a slight cold. It wasn't fair, arriving so soon on the heels of the last one. She and Angela went out for a quiet drink in a cocktail bar after the party broke up at 10. Angela was in no hurry to get home. It was David's turn to have the weekly poker game at their house, and she just wouldn't be able to sleep with all that noise going on, unless she had a little self-prescribed sedative first, which in her case would be 2 slow gin fizzes. Sarah had a Ward 8 and the 2 women rehashed the bridge game. In the meantime they managed to infect everyone in the Poliston cocktail bar, including 2 young men drinking beer nearby. They were on their way to California just as Larry Underwood and his friend Rudy Schwartz had once gone to seek their fortunes. A friend of theirs had promised them jobs with a moving company. The next day they headed west, spreading the disease as they went. Chain letters don't work. It's a known fact. The $1 million or so you are promised if you'll just send $1 single to the name at the top of the list, add yours to the bottom, and then send the letter on to 5 friends never arrives. This one, the Captain Trips chain letter, worked very well. The pyramid was indeed being built, not from the bottom up but from the tip down, said Tip being a deceased Army security guard named Charles Campion. All the chickens were coming home to roost. Only instead of the mailman bringing each participant bale after bale of letters, each containing a single dollar bill, Captain Trips brought bales of bedrooms with a body or 2 in each one, and trenches, and dead pits, and finally bodies slung into the oceans on each coast and into quarries and into the foundations of unfinished houses. And in the end, of course, the bodies would rot where they fell. Sarah Bradford and Angela Dupre walked back to their parked cars together, infecting 4 or 5 people they met on the street. then pecked cheeks and went their separate ways. Sarah went home to infect her husband and his 5 poker buddies and her teenage daughter, Samantha. Unknown to her parents, Samantha was terribly afraid she had caught a dose of the clap from her boyfriend. As a matter of fact, she had. As a further matter of fact, she had nothing to worry about. Next to what her mother had given her, a good working dose of the clap was every bit as serious as a little eczema of the eyebrows. The next day Samantha would go on to infect everybody in the swimming pool at the Poliston YWCA. And so on.